We've got one more panel before the break that it's my pleasure to introduce. As companies invest in climate solutions to achieve a net zero future, to get there, we know that they also need strong policies and a good policy landscape to enable that economy-wide decarbonization. Over this past year, as we've said in a couple of the panels so far, we've seen companies step up to publicly support climate measures introduced in Congress. In fact, I think we just heard Ralph and Pedro and Calvin say that right in this last panel. So with that in mind, that important interplay between business investment and policy, I'd like to welcome our next panel, Driving Corporate Engagement in Climate Policy, moderated by my former colleague, Victoria Mills of Environmental Defense Fund, where panelists will discuss how companies can engage on policies that in turn can help them meet their climate goals. Victoria, take it away.
Thank you so much, Nat. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Victoria Mills. I'm on the EDF Plus business team at Environmental Defense Fund. I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to C2ES and to the Climate Registration for organizing this conference and just impeccable planning and organization. I am thrilled to be here today talking about corporate engagement in climate policy with three distinguished speakers from companies who have a lot to say on this topic. Starting with Meg Thurlow from General Electric, John Monsif from Carrier, and Stephen Harper from Intel, joining us virtually. So our goal for this session is to inspire and empower all of you to advocate for the policies needed to achieve your climate goals, as well as our national and global climate targets. So what we want you to take away from today's session is three things. First of all, why climate policy is needed to achieve those targets, which policies are top priority for advocacy right now, and how you can be most effective as advocates. So let's have our speakers introduce themselves. I'm going to ask you to each say a little bit about your role in your companies and then answer this question, which is, why is now the moment for corporate leadership on climate policy? And Steve, I'm going to ask you to start.
Well, thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for being here, and thanks to C2ES and the registry for sponsoring. The last public conference I was at face-to-face was in Detroit 2 years ago at the leadership conference there. I was hoping this was going to be my first venture back into reality, but Saturday I turned up with a positive COVID test. So I'm just across the river from you all at home in my home office. I think the answer, and also in case I say something that is totally inexplicable, it's all due to COVID brain.
I'm going to use that same excuse, Steve.
Yeah, not because I don't know what I'm talking about. I think if not now, when? It's actually way late in the game given what we know about climate science, and I think both the public and the private sectors have to step up their ambition and complement each other. And I think the only way that's going to happen is if companies are not only making commitments and implementing those commitments, but also pushing for complementary public policies, because what's at stake here is nothing less than the reinvention of our energy system, and that has got to have government involvement.
Thanks so much. Let's go to you next, John.
Great. Thank you so much, Victoria. First and foremost, thanks so much for having me on the panel. I really appreciate that. Victoria and I have worked together for many years now, and our partnership is critically important to me, and so thank you for that. Thank you to C2ES as well as the Climate Registry too for putting together this really important event, and the timing could not be better. We've seen, as you all have, report after report that really states that unless the global community changes their energy policies, the Earth is going to be uninhabitable. Hard stop. And if that doesn't get us motivated and scared, I don't know what will. From our perspective, Carrier is really committed as a building technology company to reducing our footprint. We manufacture products like HVAC systems that are that are energy efficient and use low GWPs. So we are going to do our part, but we can't do that without federal policy. It has to be part of the overall solution. So as a company, we're committed to doing our part. We need to work with the government to do our part, to do their part. And right now, there's a bill called the Build Back Better bill that's have been negotiated now for almost a year. We need to see action on that, and we need to see that move. We're going to do our part from a business perspective, but again, the government needs to do their part, and we're here to advocate for its passage, and we'll continue to do so until the very last minute.
Thanks, John. Meg?
Thanks so much, Victoria, and I want to echo my thanks for having us here today. We very much agree. At GE, we describe this time as a decade of action. It's a narrow window that we have to bend the curve of decarbonization so that we can meet the commitments we've made around the world by 2050. We believe that we can do that most effectively through a combination of wind, gas, and a modernized grid. But just like John said, we have to have committed partners to help us. We need government, we need the policy certainty so that we can go forward with confidence to most effectively, efficiently make those changes. I think corporations have an especially unique role to play in this effort. Just yesterday, Edelman was out with its latest trust barometer, and again, U.S. business was the most trusted sector for America. So we have a role to play in speaking up and showing leadership on this issue. And I think we also bring a lot of expertise and experience to the table. Together with our customers, GE provides 1/3 of the world's electricity. We helped invent the modern grid with our founder, Thomas Edison, and we operate in 175 countries around the world. So we have the scale and the experience to help step up and make a difference now.
Thanks so much. So I'm going to set up the discussion with a little bit of context, taking my moderator's prerogative, on the need for climate policy in this critical decade and the critical role of businesses in getting it done. So we can't ignore that this conversation is happening as the world faces twin crises, a war in Ukraine and worsening impacts of climate change. And both are tremendously destabilizing, both come with colossal human and economic costs, and both are tied to the world's dependence on fossil fuels. So the IPCC's latest report makes clear that the only way to ensure peace and prosperity and security over the long term is to transition to a global economy powered by clean energy. And it also points to the critical role that public policy plays in driving that transition by investing in clean energy solutions and clean transportation and spurring innovation across the economy. So let's bring it home to the United States and what are the opportunities we have right in front of us. So we can pass these clean energy investments that are part of Build Back Better, that are continuing to be discussed as part of a budget bill or other legislative package this year. We heard a lot of support for that on the last panel. We're going to hear more about that today, about why that's strategic for this country and for businesses in it. And those include tax credits and investments that will help to decarbonize the energy system as well as clean up transportation. They're also really important to addressing environmental injustice because climate change impacts are felt disproportionately by already overburdened communities of color. And these investments prioritize investment in disadvantaged communities. They address improving resilience to climate change, and they cut pollution in key sectors, especially pollution from trucks, which again falls most heavily on communities next to warehouses and highways, and you'll hear more about that in the session led tomorrow by my colleague Marin Taylor, so I encourage you to come to that. So I just can't overstate how important these investments are to our climate future. The IPCC says we have to reduce emissions 43% by 2030. That's like 7.5 years from now. So it's urgent, and the world cannot reach this target without American leadership, and we cannot credibly lead without action. So that's where businesses come in. And more businesses are setting really ambitious science-based targets, net zero targets, to reduce their emissions and their supply chain emissions, and that is an essential first step. But even if all of those companies achieve their goals on time and in full, we still wouldn't bend the curve down fast enough or far enough, and that's where public policy comes in. So because businesses have the power to shape and influence public policy, they need to be using that power to advocate for the policies needed to achieve their enterprise level targets as well as our national and global targets. And you know, the fact is that companies can't meet those goals without public policy. Say you have a 100% renewable energy goal. How are you going to do that without a clean and modernized grid? You want to reduce your scope 3 emissions or convert your fleet to 100% zero emission vehicles. How are you going to do that without public investment in charging infrastructure? So, you know, the need for public policy starts from your corporate commitment and goes all the way up to the national and global targets. So for all of these reasons, we at EDF and with our NGO friends like to say that climate leadership requires policy leadership. They are inseparable. And I hope by now all of you are familiar with the AAA framework for corporate climate leadership that is endorsed by EDF and C2ES and WWF and Ceres and many other NGOs, the leading NGOs that work with business. And the A's stand for advocate for the policies you need to achieve your climate goals and our national targets. Align your trade association's advocacy with those same goals and allocate your spending, whether on lobbying or political contributions or advertising, et cetera, to advance and not obstruct climate policy. So I'll just end my intro by saying it's not just NGOs insisting that climate leadership requires policy leadership, it's also investors, your employees, your customers are increasingly caring about this issue and putting more pressure on companies to put their lobbying muscle where their mouth is on climate. So now let's get into exploring what climate policy leadership looks like with our speakers. So a few of you mentioned how climate policy is strategic for your business. Meg, could you unpack that a little bit more about why GE has kind of consistently advocated for policies, including some of the ones that we're talking about today?
Sure. Well, like you said, policy is important to us to help us achieve our goals, but it is also something that we hear from our customers regularly. They are coming to us for help meeting their own decarbonization goals. So this is as much something we're doing on behalf of our customers as anyone else. We need, I think at its heart, policy certainty. We need to know that the decisions we make, the investments we make are made with a foundation, with a trusted partner. The government is moving in the same direction that we are, that shares that vision so that we're moving in the right direction. For us right now, in the near term, that means things like extending the wind PTC, the production tax credit, for example. And I think in that case, you know, Victoria, something you said earlier, it's not just about increasing the growth, supporting the growth of onshore wind in the United States, but it's also about ensuring strong U.S. manufacturing for the long-term future of wind, making sure that there's strong U.S. leadership, technological leadership on wind as we see that growth increasing around the world. It's also supporting emerging technologies that we know will play a key role, like 45Q, a tax credit for carbon capture, or work to support R&D. We're looking into superconductors, working on superconductors for our wind turbines, so you don't have to use rare earth minerals anymore. So all of those things that, you know, just give us a greater certainty as we move forward in our breakthrough energy technology.
How about you, John?
That's great. That was a great answer and a great introduction. I would almost say that's what she said, right? But at the end of the day, for us, carriers set really ambitious 2030 ESG goals that we're really excited about, one of which is to reduce our customers' carbon footprint by 1 gigaton. To do so, we're investing over $2 billion over the next several years in R&D to come up with products to help reduce our customers' footprint. So that's a huge goal for us, and we're an enabler for our customers. But we can't do this alone, and that's where government and federal policy really comes in. We need the government to incentivize the purchase of energy efficient equipment, of electrified equipment, think heat pumps, right? And to really create a market demand for that. Certainly our customers are asking for it now, but I think there's a role for government to really increase that market demand through different tax incentives. And so if they are able to do that, and we invest in these products and develop these products, then ultimately when the customer demand increases, we'll have products available for them to use to reduce their footprint. So it's a really important strategic partnership where government and business work together to advance our goals and ultimately help the planet.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Steve.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting for Intel and for the semiconductor industry, climate change is both an offensive and defensive interest. Defensive in the sense that you can't make semiconductors without fluorinated gases. Fluorinated gases are high GWP gases. Our entire industry is something like 0.07% of US industrial emissions of greenhouse gases, so we're not a big part of the problem, but nobody likes fluorinated gases. And the problem is we have not found as an industry a substitute for fluorine for reasons I could go into. After 40 years of R&D and billions of dollars spent. So we have to play defense in order to continue to be able to produce. On the offensive side, you know, we make the chips that are basically the foundational technology for every quote-unquote smart technology that McKinsey and Jesse and others have shown, the ITU have shown are probably the cheapest, most important initial investment in improving energy efficiency and achieving climate mitigation at a reasonable cost. So for us, strong public policies promoting those markets are an important market driver for us. So, you know, we think both ends are important. On the defensive side, I will say there's legislation that's about to get funded, we believe, called the CHIPS Act, which is focused on bringing back a lot more of the capacity percentage-wise of the semiconductor manufacturing industry back to the US by helping close the cost of what it takes to build a $10 billion factory here in the US versus a much less expensive proposition in Taiwan. A big part of that legislation is money to set up something called the National Semiconductor Technology Center, NSTC. And we hope that a big chunk of the NSTC money will go for existential environmental R&D, including specifically finding substitutes for fluorine. So that's another area where we think government can be a helper as we try to address our part of the problem.
Thanks so much. Let's come back to the clean energy tax credits for a moment and shift from the why to the how. Could you talk, maybe starting with you, John, on like, what do you do to advocate? What do you do to make your voice heard? What are approaches you found effective on that particular advocacy goal, and what would you like to see more companies doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so we were pleased to see the House put together the Build Back Better Act. It's not perfect, but it certainly has elements of about $550 million for $500 billion for climate provisions. We saw that. All those climate provisions don't impact carriers' business, but we recognize that this is a time to act, and this is an amazing opportunity to advance climate policies. And so we were committed to supporting the whole entire climate provision package in the Build Back Better Act. So what do you do then? Well, we can go and have one-on-one meetings with members and speak behind closed doors, but we felt it was important to be very public about this. So Carrier, along with 16 other companies, signed a letter to Speaker Pelosi as well as Senator Leader Schumer, asking for the passage of these provisions. The companies collectively have $500 billion in sales here in the US and have 500,000 employees in the US. So these are big companies that came out very publicly at the heat of the debate about this particular bill and made it clear that we wanted to do this and wanted to support this because it's not a feel-good thing to do, but it's good for business. It's good for our employees, it's good for our customers, and it's good for the planet. So we're really excited about that effort. We'll continue to advocate with our like-minded companies and also, quite frankly, with our NGO partners. A lot of the work we do, we can't do without teaming up with them and creating coalitions to really get our voice heard. So we'll continue to do that. And just very briefly, as I mentioned earlier, we're really focused on incentives. And so we supported, specifically within Build Back Better, a tax credit to incentivize the purchase of energy efficient equipment, as well as a really sizable rebate program on electrified appliances. So again, think heat pumps. Heat pumps, I didn't know what it was until I joined Carrier about a year ago. I've learned a lot about it, and it's become a hot topic on the Hill. So we're excited hot topic, right? That's funny, that's good. So we're excited, and again, we'll continue to advocate for these policies with our colleagues.
What about you, Meg?
I love the advocacy side of issues. We do a lot of the same things that John mentioned. We send our leaders to the Hill to show what a priority climate policy is for us. We partner with organizations, with customers. Just a couple months ago, we signed on to a C2ES letter in support of the climate provisions in Build Back Better to show our support there. But one thing that is relatively unique that we do to support our advocacy efforts is we utilize a grassroots network that we've built over the years. It includes interested employees, but also our supplier partners, so companies that make parts that go into our products, retirees, third-party supporters all across the United States, and we talk to them about policies that impact us and by extension them. We educate them on the issues, why we support certain policies that we do, and then we give them the opportunity to engage. They can amplify our good news, share news articles or recent breakthroughs that we've made on a particular front, and then they can advocate. They can write their members of Congress, but we're giving them the resources that oftentimes our supplier partners may just not have. They're smaller companies, and they don't have that kind of network or especially education side built up. So that's something we take very seriously to give more people an opportunity to speak up. And I would say when they are speaking up, one thing that we found particularly effective on climate issues is to drive home how real it is and the difference that we are making today. I think all too often, as much as we've talked about this being a critical time to act now, it can seem far away when we're talking about differences that will come to light in 2030 or 2050. So we have a map right now on our website that highlights about 60 different projects underway today, all on breakthrough energy technologies. So these are hydrogen and carbon capture projects. It is the use of sustainable aviation fuel in flights now. It is a reflection of ongoing current work on things to demonstrate that these emerging opportunities are not pipe dreams, but are hard at work in the field now.
Thanks. Steve, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think on the influencing front, to some extent, Intel and the semiconductor industry have some limitations in terms of our effectiveness because of the concentration of our industry geographically in a relatively few number of states. And of course, we have suppliers, but they generally tend to be abroad for the most part, not entirely. So, for example, years ago when cap and trade legislation was winding its way, we thought, through Congress, had relatively little ability to impact provisions that were important to us because we really couldn't bring additional votes to the table because all of our senators and House members were either in solidly blue states or solidly red states and had already staked out a position. So we found on climate change the most important and effective way to have an impact is through coalitions. And we have been a member of the Business Council at C2ES for almost 25 years, almost the entire length of the organization. And while C2ES doesn't lobby in the traditional sense, they do a heck of a lot of very good educational work. And we've participated in that and supported that, particularly projects focused on the role of technical innovation. The other thing we have done is gone together with 15 or 16 other companies from a wide variety of industries to form something called the Digital Climate Alliance, to focus on digital solutions, both from mitigation and adaptation perspectives. And we found when you get together with a broad variety of diverse companies and go in and meet with people on the Hill or at the state level, that you have a more unique voice than if you're going in as part of a single industry trade association. And the final thing I'll say about trade associations, I think the NGO, and this may be controversial, but I think the NGO community, and I understand why this is a little bit too strident on the changing your trade association message. The reason I say that is most companies belong to trade associations to cover a wide variety of issues. And it's very unlikely that companies are going to drop out of trade associations over one single issue. Companies can and have, and we have tried to make our broader trade associations more progressive on climate change. And I think there's been some market success on that going back to the Obama administration. But I really think companies could be most effective by working through broad coalitions that can speak to the issue from a broader set of perspectives and not just from a single interest, single industry point of view.
So let's talk some more about the organizational issues and challenges that are involved in advocating for climate policy. And kind of, there's the sustainability department, and then there's the government affairs, and sometimes they talk to each other and sometimes they don't. And would you like to share some perspectives, maybe starting with you, Meg, on how does that alignment work? How do you crosswalk the two goals at GE?
Sure. Well, at GE, we're in the process of combining all of our energy businesses into one as we prepare for an eventual spinoff in about 2 years' time. But we are consolidating messaging not just across departments, but across renewables, gas power, nuclear, digital, grid hardware as well as software. So it's a lot of pieces. We went through this exercise a couple of years ago, and I think developing a single message, consolidating the story that you have to tell is incredibly helpful to ensuring that everyone is kind of singing off the same sheet when they go out and advocate, so that we have a shared vision. We have clear goals in mind, and repeat. Just in today's incredibly busy world, you cannot rely on your message getting across once. You really cannot say it often enough.
Repetition is catchy. Yes. How about you, Steve? Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think I agree with what's been said. I think from our perspective, we almost have, we've gone through a second or third wave of real solid interest in sustainability, not just climate. And we now have probably 3 different main centers of activity from across the company working on various aspects of sustainability, particularly focused on delivering on our net zero 2040 commitment that we announced a little over a month ago. And luckily, these centers of excellence and interest and enthusiasm have come about in a way that is pretty well integrated. And I think that was by design. In previous waves of enthusiasm over climate and sustainability, it hasn't always been that integrated or coordinated. But I can spend about probably 30 hours a week involved in one or another of those threads of activity, and there's enough overlap. And the other thing I will say is that the first time we really have people who are in the bowels of the business groups, the people who are designing chips, the people who are building the environmental control equipment at our factories, who are involved in some of these activities, not just the government affairs geeks like myself and legal and the CSR team. So it really and now has involved the heart of the company. And so sometimes there's a little bit of miscommunication or lack of coordination, but that's more than made up for by goodwill and by excitement.
Yeah. John?
Right. I think very simply, it really starts at the top. Our CEO, Dave Gitlin, is committed to combating climate change and sustainability. And as a result of that, that passion and that drive translates into company goals. And then we're all tasked with setting our own goals to achieve those goals. So from my perspective as a lobbyist, I need to be sure I understand our company's goals and where we're going. And then ultimately, I need to show to my colleagues how public policy can help them achieve their goals. I have a lot of education that I need to do. DC is very foreign to the average person. And so my job, and I often kid, my internal customer is more important than my external. Because if I don't get their buy-in, and if they don't understand what I do and how I can help them, then I'm not going to be able to do my job. And as I said earlier, finding ways to incentivize purchasing, energy efficient products and et cetera, all those things can be done with our partnership with government, and our team needs to know that. And so that has been a big focus of mine. And what's been wonderful is to see these internal successes. I would argue that those are more enjoyable to me than my external. And to have those wins and to see the company's philosophy on public policy and engaging change with time. So
we're almost out of time, but I want to give each of you a chance to make a closing comment, and I'll make one. Maybe stay with you, John. Anything you haven't said that you want to tell people today?
No, listen, first of all, thank you so much for, again, having me on the panel. That means a lot, and it's wonderful to join my colleagues. I think you've heard it repeatedly today. We need to act now. This is the time to act. Businesses will do their part. We need government to do their part. And then, quite frankly, I turn it to you all and say, you need to join us in that advocacy. Reach out to your members of Congress, email them, set up meetings, and share why these climate provisions are important to pass right now. So that's my simple call to action. The water is warm, so jump in with us.
Steve, how about you?
Yeah, I would say two quick things. Number one, look, we've all experienced the wild pendulum swings of federal policy in recent history. And we may experience some more pendulum swinging in the very near future. And that is one of the reasons why business leadership is essential, because businesses can hopefully help modulate some of that pendulum swinging, at least the extent of it, and can carry the issue forward in periods of time when the federal government, quite frankly, isn't doing as much as it should or can. And then the final thing is that our conversation here today has been all about federal policy. I think it's important to note that much of the progress we've made on climate in the last 10, 15, 20 years has been because of leadership by states, particularly on renewable energy. And so I think, that's not going away. And I think companies, even when there is federal policy activity moving forward, we can't turn our back on the states. We need to be advocating in the states in which we operate for progressive adaptation and mitigation policies.
Excellent points. Meg?
I would say, to folks that are out there thinking about how they can get involved, it's sessions like these that make me feel really optimistic about our chances. We've got challenges. We've seen the big swings that Stephen mentioned in policy, but we also have a lot of companies that are out there exploring new ways to engage and to advocate. And I always come away from sessions like this with feeling inspired and coming away with some new ideas to try. So, if you're thinking about getting engaged, speak up and join conversations like this. Reach out to other companies. I think everyone's really been willing to collaborate and brainstorm. So these kinds of things, make me excited to roll up my sleeves and dig in a little more.
Thank you so much. So, I mean, final word for me is just in this decisive decade, it's the shift that we all have to make, I think, is from asking what can we do to address climate change to what will it take? And it's going to take leadership at all levels, and it's going to take public policy. So thank you to Intel and GE and Carrier for all you are doing to advance policy here in the US and wherever you operate. And thanks to everybody for your attention. Please join me in thanking the speakers.
Thanks, Victoria and John and Megan and Steve, and thanks to all our panelists and speakers so far. I have one quick announcement before we break, and that is that Sheldon Whitehouse, Senator from Rhode Island, has gracefully agreed to be our closing speaker tomorrow afternoon. If you haven't heard Sheldon speak, I recommend you stay because he's a barn raiser. So we're really pleased about that. In the meantime, for now, we are going to take a break. We are amazingly almost exactly on time. So we will ask you to be back in your seats by 3:35, a 20-minute break for the next sessions. We invite you to make the most of the time, say hi to old colleagues in the foyer. We've got coffee. We've got great exhibitions out in the exhibition space and online. So make the most of the 20 minutes, and we'll see you back here at 3:35. Thanks.